Afternoon, and thank you for joining us today and taking the time to come hang out with Gardening in the Panhandle Live. It's April the 8th. Hard to believe we're already in April, but we're here and the lawn game is in full swing. You know, to me and many of you probably, walking on a well-tended lawn is extremely satisfying, and you know we're all shooting for that. And to achieve that, we're going to be helping you today by answering all your lawn-related questions, everything from turfgrass selection to fertilizing to pest control. And to help us do that, we got the true A-listers here today, guys. We've got a great panel. We're headlined this week by Dr. Bryan Unruh this month. Bryan, why don't you introduce yourself to the group here?
So I'm the old guy at the University of Florida, been working on turf since January of 1996. But so I'm based here in the Panhandle. I'm at the West Florida Research and Education Center, which is just north of Pensacola.
Good deal. All right. Next up, we've got Dr. Pat Williams. He's the county director in Wakulla County. Howdy, Pat.
Good afternoon, Daniel.
Tell us a little bit about yourself for those of us who are new today.
Well, I'm a lifelong horticulturist. I've been doing this for 47 years. I've been with the University of Florida for about 4 years now, my 10th state. So I've seen all four corners of the lower 48 and the geographic center. And I got to tell you, I'm with all your listening audience today. Florida is a tough place to grow turfgrass.
It sure can be. Moving on down the line, we've got Mr. Larry Williams. He's a longtime horticulture agent in Okaloosa County. How's life out west there, Larry?
Good afternoon. I agree that lawns can be frustrating here, but we don't need to add to it by following bad or poor practices. I'm the horticulture agent that primarily works with residential homeowners and the Master Gardener program in Okaloosa County.
Thanks, Larry. And finally, straight out of our state's capital, except he's not there today, Mark Tancig. What's happening, Mark?
Doing all right. Gonna hope to help some people today with their lawns. And I think the other extension agents would agree that a lot of times we are trying to keep people from over loving their lawn and killing it with water and fertilizer and other improper practices.
Yeah, good deal. Yeah, there's a lot of good information and bad information out there. So we're going to try to sift through that today and get to what you need to know. So we're going to dive into our questions here. So over the next hour, we're going to get to as many of these things as we can. We had a big response to this event, and so we thank you guys for submitting questions. And if for some reason we don't get to yours today, just shoot us an email and we'll try to get to it in the future or answer it personally. So we're going to start with you, Dr. Unruh, and this is a question we get all the time. You know, Florida is probably I would guess the fastest growing state in the country. And a lot of that has to come from the north because we're about as far south as you can go in the lower 48. And so the question is, what's the answer to, I want a lawn like I had up north?
Head back north. Honestly, you know, I mean, and that's something that we really have to differentiate. Those grasses that you grew up north, the fescues, the ryegrasses, the bluegrasses, they will not persist down here, you know, in our summertime heat. We do a little bit of overseeding with some of those species in the winter months, though I'm not a big fan of overseeding, you know, in the urban lawn. But you know, our species are very different. And so it's just a matter of making sure that we manage them very different. We'll discuss some of those practices along the way, but you know, probably the worst is winterizer, and we'll come back and circle around on that one after a while. But we don't want to do that in the South.
So you can have a nice lawn, but it won't look exactly the same.
That's true.
Yes. All right, Pat. Let's move right along. Dr. Unruh mentioned overseeding, and Doc, we'll probably come back to you on this one also for your opinion and what your research says. But Pat, what grass species do we recommend for winter overseeding? Should the client want to do that? And if you did, when would that grass be sown? I believe you're muted, Pat.
I was muted. I've got an audience watching me today, so you know they're applauding and everything. So I've got to keep them muted.
Oh yeah.
Overseeding, first off, is planting cool season seed over an established warm season turfgrass. And the reason you overseed is so you have 12 months of green lawn. And I kind of agree with Dr. Unruh. Why work that hard all year long when you don't have to? But anyway, so it's kind of one of those, it's a really hard thing. First of all, we always used to use annual rye, but I know ball fields will use just regular ryegrass or some of the intermediate species, but then sometimes they have to use chemicals to get them to wind down in spring. We want to start seeding when our warm season grasses start to go dormant. So if your warm season grass is still being mowed every week, it's almost not possible to overseed. So we're looking anywhere from late September to October, even in November. The big thing is two things you really have to remember. You've got to have contact with the seed in the soil. So once your warm season starts growing, you've got to rake it out real good, get all that debris or thatch out of there. And then as you put your seed down, if you've got a really pretty thick lawn, use a broom or something like that, get the seed work down in so you've got soil contact, and then you've got to water. One of the problems why we don't do a lot of seeding in Florida is our soils don't hold water that our seeds need to, imbibe or take up water to start germination. So once you start that time of year, you've got to get the seeds watered, and that may be a couple weeks. The good things about the annual rye is that's that fix it that you can put on a spot and water, and it's growing in 3 to 7 days. But that's really what it is. And before you do that, you should mow your warm season down pretty short, so that when you're maintaining your cool season, it's at the right height. And you read the literature and they'll say overseed St. Augustine, but you can't mow the St. Augustine any lower than about 3 inches, because then you'll damage that for the next year. It should stay green anyway.
Okay. Doc, what you think about, we heard from Pat how to do it. What would be some of the negative effects on your lawn should you choose to overseed, or possible negative effects?
Sure. Well, of all of our warm season grasses, shade tolerance is kind of a challenge. It's what happens, especially this time of year, with that ryegrass. Our weather right now is perfect for ryegrass growth, especially annual ryegrass. And what happens is that stuff is growing like a banshee out there. About the same time those warm seasons, so your Centipede and your St. Augustine and Zoysia are coming out of dormancy. And so what happens is that ryegrass gets really tall, and it is actually shading that base grass that's underneath there. And you can see it thin that grass out, especially Centipede can really get thinned. And so it's one of those, and Pat said it, for one, unless you're just, fixated on that green color all winter long in the urban landscape, I would avoid it. It is actually, it's largely detrimental. We see it out on the golf course, we see it on our athletic fields, and that's done for a whole different purpose. We have fall and winter and spring sports that are played on that. And if it's not overseeded, those ball fields or golf courses, then just the traffic of the athletes will wear the Bermuda grass down to the nubs. And so one of those, I'm just not a big fan of overseeding. It has, in my opinion, the negatives far outweigh, that aesthetic value. But if that's important to you, then let her rip.
For sure. So while we're here with you, this is a question that lots of folks want to ask. And I think it's going to be a fairly simple answer, but how well do new turfgrass varieties thrive against weeds? And I'm not sure new has anything to do with this.
Well, yeah. So, it's a competition issue. Yeah. And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to kill this, that, or the other. I think if we would take our, the information you're going to learn today, take it and learn to apply it and apply it well, then some of those weeds and those problems tend to subside at least a little bit. But there are some new varieties. And so there's one that's making a pretty big market impact called Vista St. Augustine grass. And that one is glyphosate tolerant. So you can literally spray right over the top of it with glyphosate and control every known weed pretty much there is. And that's a big game changer in the business, because St. Augustine grass in particular, which is still, that's a predominant lawn grass across the state of Florida. Its major weakness is the fact that there really aren't any good herbicides for killing weeds that doesn't injure the St. Augustine grass. And so by having glyphosate tolerance in there, that's a positive. That grass, the Vista St. Augustine, also has a dwarfing gene in it as well. and it requires about 50% less mowing. So that's kind of a cool feature of it as well. Now, availability in the Panhandle is still going to be a bit limited. It's making its way. It's making a huge impact in South Florida, but give it some time. It'll be up here.
Yeah, some cool things coming down the pike in the turfgrass world. So let's go over to Larry. Larry, hope you're awake. Wake up over there. Question here. I've got St. Augustine grass, but maybe it's not doing so good. Can I overseed that with Centipede to kind of introduce something else in there? What are your thoughts?
Well, that one, I think we need more information to really give a sound answer. I mean, the first thing I would want to know is why.
Yeah, I'm interpreting it like maybe the St. Augustine's not doing very good, and so
Yeah.
we're go to a lower maintenance turf.
If it's an older, if you know the nature of the beast, you know that Centipede requires less maintenance, less fertilizer for the most part. The site conditions come into play. If the St. Augustine died out because of tree competition, too much shade and root competition, seeding it with Centipede is not going to solve the problem. The other thing I would be concerned about, if it's an older St. Augustine lawn and part of the dying out process could have been from take-all root rot. Some of these disease organisms build up over the years. You need some diagnostics done. I would suggest getting a knowledgeable person on site based on the county you're in, maybe one of the extension agents or a reputable lawn care service to look at the site. It is possible to do that, to overseed with Centipede, but I would hate to give the recommendation to do that. And in a short time, you're wasting your time and money and you're back with being dissatisfied with the lawn. If it's open, sunny, and the lawn grass just died out, thinned out due to age, then yes. The final thing, I mean, that's possible. The final thing is you do not want to you don't want to cut corners in renovating a lawn. You really need a loose, level, clean planting bed for those seeds. And if that's not what you have, just throwing good, relatively expensive Centipede seeds over an ill-prepared, old, compacted soil, what used to be a St. Augustine lawn, is not going to solve your problem.
Good answer. Thanks, Larry. So some thoughts on that. Dr. Unruh, this is another question that we get all too often in the Panhandle. I'm interested in mixed sun shade lawns, kind of around oaks and mixed hardwoods and maybe some pine trees. So how about growing grass in partial shade?
Shade is just but one factor that we have to look at. And that's one of our challenges. We have one side of the landscape that's got shade and the other side is full sun, and we want one plant to grow in both places. And so, right. And that makes it a bit challenging. But what we haven't really discussed is root competition, and that tends to be, especially under oak trees and different things like that. It's shade is clearly a factor, because what happens, the light's coming down from the sun. That tree has got great big old green leaves on it, and those green leaves are taking the light for photosynthesis and giving the leftovers to the turf grass that's growing down there underneath it. And so there's just not sufficient light or light quality that's hitting the turf on the ground. And then when you couple that with that root competition, we have some problems. And so if you're in one of those scenarios where shade becomes an issue, then you're really limited to about two options, and that's St. Augustine and Zoysia grass. And so the Centipede will kind of grow right up to, it'll start to thin out in that environment. And in Bermuda grasses, that's probably the biggest question I get oftentimes from folks, that move down, is why isn't there more Bermuda grass in the Florida landscape? It's because we have a lot of shade.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of Bermuda grasses like Celebration and Tiff Grand that are marketed as shade tolerant, but that's a relative number. If you compare it to, say, Tiff Way, which is kind of the old industry standard on ball fields and athletic fields, Tiff Way versus, say, Tiff Grand or Celebration, those two, the Tiff Grand and Celebration, require about 10% less sun, less light. So it's a very relative term. And then you compare it to, say, Zoysias and St. Augustine's, and they require about 50% less light. So those are just some relative. That's why we don't have Bermuda grass really in the urban landscape. Now, if you're going in one of these new developments and there's just nothing there, then let her rip. Bermuda will do fine. Actually, Bermuda grass is the world's worst weed. We just culture it and make it look pretty.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
And so put some Bermuda in there. And then if you think about from the landscape design side of things, think about your tree species that you're going to be planting. Physically, where are you going to place those trees relative to the turfed areas? And then choose trees that have form and canopy that is more upright as opposed to this big sprawling thing. That's going to block a lot of light. But that's kind of if you're going into one of these landscapes, developments where they just everything's bulldozed and flat and there's nothing out there, Bermuda might not be a bad option.
Yeah. So again, one of those, it depends. Choose wisely, plan wisely. All right. So now we're going to move from Dr. Unruh's section of research, turfgrass, his favorite topic, and that's turfgrass alternatives. And so Mark Tancig, we're going to start with you. So we get a lot of questions about, can you have a native yard? And I know we had a little chat before we got on, so you may have some interesting thoughts about this one. And then if you would touch on some possible, just quickly, some alternatives to turfgrass that might be acceptable in certain situations.
Sure. So the idea of a native lawn, you will be happy to know that there's general agreement that botanists consider St. Augustine grass to be a native species, and we actually have I can't remember what insect it is, but there's actually a native insect that St. Augustine grass is its host plant. So St. Augustine grass is an option. Now, your kind of cultivars that have been developed, those aren't like native plant genetic stock, but again, St. Augustine grass is considered a native species. As far as an alternative to turf grass, it is really hard to find a plant that can kind of handle the damage and the traffic of turf grass. So that's why, again, these lawn grasses work really well in those particular areas because they can handle getting walked on a regular basis. And, they differ in their ability to handle traffic, but we talk about ground covers like, say, perennial peanut or sunshine mimosa or maybe Asiatic jasmine. But those, you're not going to be able to kind of run the kids through there. Maintenance wise, it's going to be a little bit different than a lawn, but those are your options. And I think we might get talking later about these mixed lawn species, right? So I know someone asked about, mixed clovers or forbs in your lawn. And if your yard is like my yard, you will get that naturally if you don't use a regular herbicide program, right? So right now, I know many of us have some black.
Some people call those mixed forbs weeds, right?
Yeah, some people call those mixed lawns just weeds. And I just helped a woman who had black medic all through the yard, but she liked it. And I said, hey, if you like it, it's your yard, go for it.
Yeah, for sure. So, Dr. Unruh, I know that kind of piggybacking on this, Dr. Dale down in Gainesville is working with mixing different species of turfgrass and cultivars together, and maybe there is some work on experimenting with mixed forb lawns. And so, is there any reason yet to recommend this kind of stuff over just a monoculture of a single species?
Are there any reasons? There's a lot of reasons. And so, there's a group of us at the university since really late 2018, early 2019, have really kind of come in and around this idea of, looking way down the line. What does the future urban landscape look like? And so tremendous number of hours have been invested in, kind of thinking about this. And then in fact, I've significantly redirected a major portion of my effort. And don't tell anybody, but last week I had $7,000 worth of plants delivered. And so I've got frog fruit and the mimosa, coreopsis, and then I have 2 greenhouses that are slammed full of different perennial peanut, pintoid peanut. And I have a PhD student who's going to focus really the next 3 years of his life looking at what we call the ecosystem services of turf and then these alternatives, because they have different functions in the landscape. And so, and so we'll be looking at that, and there's some real trade-offs. There's people that are advocating taking turf out of a landscape because it uses too much water, and I've been doing this a long time. Turf plants don't waste water; people waste water. We have to keep that in mind. And you've all seen it. You drive down the road, it's raining cats and dogs, and the sprinklers are running. Turfgrass gets the blame for somebody's stupidity. That's not a turf thing.
But did that grass turn the sprinkler on? All right.
It did. Gotta be honest, it knows how to, crawl across the garage, up the wall, and push the button on the control. St. Augustine's pretty smart. But all that to say that, there's trade-offs. What happens when you take something out? When you think about groundwater recharge, you think about temperature abatement, the fact that we know that, ground covers, turf or otherwise, cool the environment. So we'll be looking at really all of those parameters. And so here's the pitch, June 16th, come over here to the Research Center in North Pensacola, and you'll be able to see all of these new urban landscape things going in. And quickly, you mentioned Adam Dell's work. And so we're not mixing species yet. We're mixing cultivars within species of turfgrass. And that just really gets into, increasing biodiversity and we tend, and we want to, sometimes people will hiss when we say monoculture, as if it's a really bad thing. But the reality is and our work is really showing this, that we can blend, for example, St. Augustine grass cultivars. What we're blending A with B is kind of irrelevant. This cultivar with this cultivar. It's just the fact that you're mixing some cultivars, and I guess it just messes with the bug's head or something. And what we're seeing is reduced insect pressure, and it's just the shape of the leaves and the way these different they're all St. Augustine, but just the way they grow a little bit different. We had plots down in Central Florida at our Gainesville campus where we put just, average people out looking at the research plots. We didn't, they weren't labeled or anything. And people were not able to discern where we were mixing the cultivars from a single cultivar to 2 cultivars, even to 4 cultivars. You could not discern even after several years, what the mixes were. So,
very cool.
So yeah, it's just, increasing biodiversity and the positive aspects of that. So
awesome. Yeah. So if y'all are interested in any more of that, get up with us after this and attend the field day in Jay on June the 16th, you said?
June the 16th.
Yep. All right. So we're going to move on to fertilizing and weed control. This is another huge topic I know everybody's interested in. And there's a lot of new sod getting laid right now, and here in Calhoun County, we've got 2 big sod farms, and I see trucks going by all the time hauling sod by my office. So Pat Williams over there in Wakulla County, the question to you is, how long should a person wait before fertilizing new sod that's been laid?
It's an easy answer, Daniel, and we say 30 to 60 days. And people don't realize that they've got to put that fertilizer on there. And I used to do an experiment with my students. We put plugs or seeds in 6-inch pots in the greenhouse. And on one of the treatments was a control, no fertilizer, half the recommended rate, and twice. And then they had to hypothesize. And every time we did the experiment, the treatment with no fertilizer, the roots reached the bottom of the 6-inch pot first. And I always tell people, because the roots are searching for some nutrients. I know people that will throw fertilizer granules down and put the sod down. And if you're trying to get your roots to go deep to withstand the summer pressures of water and drought and all that, it's just not there. And realizing, sod, if it comes from the sod farm, has been fertilized and has some remnants in there to start the root growth. And if it's seed, it has all the nutrients it needs to get started. So it's just convincing people. And I always tell people fertilizer is a stressor. So why stress sod or seed that has to get going?
Yeah.
30 to 60 days.
Yeah. Hate to waste all that money too when you leach it through our sand. So
yeah, and let me add to that, because when we put new sod on the ground, we tend to hit it with irrigation to keep it alive. And so that water with no roots, it's an environmental impact. And so Pat's spot on there. Spot on.
All right.
Is, you'll see starter fertilizers.
Yeah.
Let's address that real quick. Those are kind of a no-no. And I wish we could convince, architects and designers, because they'll put it into their bid specs, you must put a starter fertilizer down. Well, short of having a soil test, then, we don't need to be putting phosphorus down, just for environmental implications. Many of of our soils has adequate phosphorus. And so by all means, do a soil test to determine whether you have adequate phosphorus. If not, then add, in a pre-plant scenario, but don't put nitrogen down pre-plant.
Okay. So on the fertilizer topic, Dr. Unruh, what is, so without the knowledge of a soil test or anything like that, a good basic fertilizer for most Florida lawns if we don't have that information available?
So when we look at that, we used to put out a 16-4-8. That was a standard fertilizer that was commonly used, because if you look at the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus to potassium that's in a plant, it's a 4:1:2 ratio. So 16-4-8 is a 4:1:2 ratio. Well, we're making an assumption that if you put a 4:1:2 on the soil, that somehow it magically ends up in the plant in a 4:1:2 ratio, and it doesn't work like that. And so, first of all, again, that phosphorus, most of our soils, especially in our established landscapes, don't need additional phosphorus. And the soil test will tell us whether that needs to happen. Our nitrogen, we do not do soil tests on because it's too dynamic in the system. And so when we do fertilize for growth and we put a little bit of nitrogen down, I recommend a 1-to-1 nitrogen to potassium. So the first number and the last number on that bag of fertilizer. So something like a 15-0-15 is a pretty good product. And so that's where I would stick.
Okay, good deal. And as far as that goes, do you have any recommendations on maybe commercial grade products or brands that folks could look for, or does it matter?
The plants aren't that discerning.
Hey, N is N, K is K, right?
Hey, it's pretty hard to beat NP and K. I mean, and we get real fancy, and what's amazing, I mean, there's, synthetics and there's organics, and which way should we go and all of that. I'm telling you, the plant cannot discern, whether or not, what you put out on the ground. I mean,
Good
not
point.
that smart. It
That
can
St.
turn the
Augustine's
irrigation
pretty sharp.
controller on, but it can't tell the difference in fertilizer.
That's right. Okay, very good. So Larry, after the questions we've gotten to so far, this is probably the most common question that we get in extension as far as turfgrass in the spring goes, and that is, are weed and feed products effective? And kind of as a follow-up, I want to ask about the most common one, Scott's Bonus S. We don't want to pick on the Scott's company by any means. There are many weed and feed products, but are they effective? And if so, can you use them this late in the year? Be curious to see what you think.
Well, I wish I could come up with something that would be as popular as the weed and feed concept. A lot of people have bought into that, and I understand why. It's kind of like killing two birds with one stone. It's a very popular concept, but when you really slice it up, for the products the homeowner can get their hands on, it doesn't work. You really need to do your fertilizing and weed control separately. And let me give you some quick reasons, bullet statements why. The weed and feed concept, if you go back to what Dr. Unruh just said, most of the more common popular weed and feed products that the homeowner is going to find doesn't have the correct ratio of nitrogen and potassium. As a matter of fact, some of those, one of the most common ones until they changed it recently, was a 29-3-4. That's 29% nitrogen and only 3% potassium. That doesn't work well for long-term health of a Florida lawn. You need that equal amounts of nitrogen and potassium. I think they changed that to a 29-3-11. That's one problem. The other problem is it doesn't lend itself to spot treatment of weeds. You're not going to put a 29% nitrogen product just spot treated in your lawn just where the weeds are. You'd get stimulated grass in those areas, and areas that didn't receive the fertilizer wouldn't be stimulated. It'd be this patchwork. So that doesn't work from that standpoint. It does lend itself to a blanket application of the herbicide over the entire lawn area because the two are mixed together, usually in a granular formulation. The herbicide can easily, because it's in a granular product, it can easily end up on paved surfaces, impervious surfaces, as you're pushing the spreader along. Some of it ends up on the driveway, the walkway, possibly the street. And the next rain event that comes around can easily wash not only the nitrogen and phosphorus into the water, but now you've got a herbicide in the mix that ends up in the water. Some of the weed killers in these products, such as atrazine, which atrazine is an old and good herbicide when used correctly, but if you read the label, it clearly tells you that the herbicide can cause damage to landscape shrubs and trees in that mixed landscape where you see the picture behind me. That crepe myrtle, its roots will extend out into the lawn area, so it's going to be pulling up or potentially pulling up the herbicide. If you fertilize, if you use it as a pre-emergent, for example, February is basically when you want to put the pre-emergent out to prevent warm season weeds, but that's way too early for 29% nitrogen fertilizer. If you wait until it's the right time to fertilize, which is we're getting close to now, it's too late for the pre-emergent. So with all that said, it's better to do those two practices separately. There are products that commercial folks use that might be called a weed and feed, but I'm aware of one that is a 007 with atrazine in it. That's a different ball game. It has no nitrogen, but you're getting a little bit of potassium out with the atrazine. Always read the label. If it has a pesticide, a weed killer in the fertilizer, it is considered to be a pesticide, and you have to abide by the law and the label in putting that product out.
Just hit the nail on the head.
Anybody that's heard me speak, you hear me say, April 15th, you pay your taxes,
Yep.
and then you go fertilize the lawn. Do it in that order. Now, we got until like April or May 17th to pay our
I was
taxes.
gonna say, not this year. We got that extension a little bit.
But Larry's right. I mean, when we're targeting our crabgrass and our goosegrass, so the warm seasons, summer annual grassy weeds, those products need to be down into February 1st to March. It's too early to be putting that fertilizer out. I don't like to see any fertilizer on warm season lawns in the Florida Panhandle prior to April 15th. Last week, first week of April, we had that little cold snap came through, dropped into the 30s. And that is very damaging. If you juice that lawn up, so, prior to about April 15th, you're going to have some negatives, especially with centipede grass.
Yep. And, just looking at the 15-day forecast, we're going to still be in the low to mid 70s for a good bit of that time, so the grass ain't going to be doing a whole lot.
There's two parts. We focus on the temperature just because that's kind of easy. You go outside,
Right.
need a jacket, it's too cold to fertilize.
Yeah.
But it's also day length.
Yeah.
And our day lengths are still short. Okay. And Zoysia grass is really influenced by day length. And so it's a combination of those temperatures warming up and then our day lengths getting long enough where there's enough light, throughout the day to grow some grass.
Awesome. All right, Tancig, I can see you just chomping at the bits over there, ready to go. We're going to move a little, shift gears even a little bit from here and go into lawn maintenance and renovation. And then finally, we're going to finish up with, 20 minutes or so on pest control. So those of you with weed and bug questions, just hang tight. But Mark, this is an interesting question. My husband overwaters the lawn. Okay. Remind everyone of correct watering, please. So
Daniel, one of my favorite things to do as an extension agent is to solve marital crises. And we do this pretty often.
Oh, geez.
So watering the lawn, I think of the three main things you have to do to have a healthy lawn, right? Is to mow it right, water it right, and fertilize it right. So watering is really important, but people overdo it. So you need to be thinking about over the course of the year, when do I even need to fertilize? And because we're in North Florida, our lawns go dormant during the cool season. Just turn that system off. Just, tell your St. Augustine grass to creep on over there to the timer and just turn the whole system off all winter long, right? So say maybe October all the way through February, really, and maybe somewhat into March, you can probably just forget it, right? Once your lawn goes brown, you don't need to be watering once it goes dormant. Now, once it greens up, your lawn is actively growing, you are going to want to make sure, especially if you're looking for, if you want to have one of those best looking lawns in the neighborhood, you want to water it, especially when we're going through times of drought. During drought, our lawns will naturally go dormant. They'll turn, brown just like they do during the winter, but when it rains, they green right back up. So, think of that growing season, be kind of watching to make sure you're watering it. And then the next thing to think about is how often do you water when that system comes on, right? So I know Dr. Unruh has done some research that shows like even during a drought, you only need to water St. Augustine grass maybe 2-3 times a week to keep it nice and green. And then the amount of water that you put out is important. And so we put some links in the side here. There's a whole document on watering your Florida lawn. There's a document on calibrating your sprinkler system. And so what you want to do is you want to put out some tuna fish cans, rain gauges, turn that system on for about 15 minutes, get an idea for how much water you're putting out in inches. And what you're trying to go for is about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch every time you put out water, right? You're only trying to water and saturate the root zone there. If you're in clay soils like we are over here in Leon County, you're going to want to be more on that 1/2 inch side. Where if you're in sandy soils like down in Pat's country in Wakulla County, you might want to go up more for that 3/4 inch. So a lot of lawns that we see with fungal problems, with thrifty spots, sometimes it's just way too much water. So I'm with you. So tell your husband that the extension agent said, turn the sprinkler off and make sure we're doing this right.
And that'll solve a lot of marital problems. Just turn the sprinkler off. Or alternatively, tell them to go see your local extension agent, and Mark Tancig will handle that for you. So very good. All right, so let's move to the next question. Dr. Pat, coming back to you. This is a common question. We've got St. Augustine grass and shade. This is very common. Dr. Unruh mentioned St. Augustine grass, one of the better grasses for a shadier spot. But, even so, we've got some bare spots in the St. Augustine. So what can we do about that, if anything?
I think I go back and kind of build on what Larry was saying. We have to find out why it's thin. Anything can happen from that's where you chained up the dogs and they've been urinating for the past 6 months, or, you've got shallow soil because the tree is growing. One of the things that we try to convince people in shade is to do a few different things. Fertilize less, mow higher, and water less. And for St. Augustine, a story, when I was working or going to Texas A&M, I had a backyard and it was bare, and I watered the St. Augustine and it went 25 feet in 2 years. And my backyard was complete shade. Generally, if it's not growing traffic, St. Augustine does not like traffic. If you walk back and forth in a line on your St. Augustine lawn every day for 10 days, you'll have a worn spot and you can see it. So something's got to be causing it. Fix that problem first. If it's the soil, and if you've got healthy St. Augustine, depending on the size, it will fill in. Now, if it's a really big spot, sod it. Just be done and don't deal with that. But ultimately, we got to go back to why is it not doing good if everything else is? It could be the species, as Dr. Unruh was talking about, but and I've seen people prune trees and thin trees to get more light in, and the trees just grow back and or weakens the tree to do that. So find out the problem, and if you really have the wherewithal, just put some more sod in and go from there.
Doc, any comments?
I think it's good. One of the things, and I don't have really any hardcore research to back this up other than I've done it and it works. But in those areas that tend to thin out, get you some bagged compost and just sprinkle that over that area. Clean all the old dead junk out. Sprinkle that compost. Not a lot, 1/2 inch, and then just kind of incorporate it a little bit before putting that new grass down. I know for a fact in centipede grass, centipede will look perfect in the fall, and then you go out there about this time of year, things start greening up. You got these big old dead patches, and there's a lot of reasons for that, none of which involve bird dogs. But they they could be peeing on it. But anyway, interestingly, when centipede grass dies, it actually gives off this organic compound that coats sand particles, and it makes them hydrophobic. And you can take a garden hose and you run it on your green grass, and that water just goes right in the grass.
Yeah,
Move that hose over to that dead spot, and it will pond. because those sand particles have got coated with this organic molecule that is coming from that decaying and dying, centipede grass. So rake all that junk out of there, incorporate a little bit of, how now, brown cow, black cow, whatever, or compost that you can find, and scratch it in, and then put that new grass on it. One question popped up earlier about, could you come back in those areas and seed like centipede grass?
Yeah.
Good luck. Centipede grass seed is really difficult to get established. Takes about 3 weeks for that seedling to germinate, which the soil moisture has to be really good. And then there's about a 4, 5, 6 week period where that seedling, when it emerges, a big seedling with a little bitty tiny root. And trying to keep it hydrated is a challenge. And what ultimately happens is you're trying to hydrate that little spot that you're trying to fix, and you're going to drown out the good grass that's all around it. And so in those cases, go over to good parts of your yard, plug out, some areas and plug them back in, or you can buy plugs, at the various, nursery centers and garden centers, and plug it in, and then let it run.
Yeah. So sort of piggybacking on the overseed comment, let's say we have an old centipede lawn. This person wants to bring it back to health, and he's thinking about overseeding it. We had several questions on this. Is that an option, or should they go a different route?
I've not seen it done successfully very many times.
Yeah.
There's lots of factors. And again, it goes back, why did this deteriorate over time? And it's generally a soils related issue.
Mm-hmm.
Or some external factor. We got to focus on water, light, temperature, and nutrition. Those are the 4 biggies: water, light, temperature, nutrition.
Yep.
If each one of those things becomes limiting, then we kind of start to see the implosion start to occur. So, is it thinned out because of lack of nutrition? Is it thinned out because lack of moisture? Has it thinned out because root competition or shade has come in? What are those compounding factors that are contributing to this problem? And so we got to address those before we try to fix the problem.
True. Very
restart.
All right, Pat, this is a timely question for the last couple of years in the Panhandle dealing with these major hurricanes. And so the question here is, how do I repair lawn areas ruined by piled up Hurricane Sally debris?
Before that, Hurricane Michael debris and all that other kind of stuff.
Sure.
The first question when I thought about this one, I said, well, what was stacked on the lawn? Was it concrete chunks from the retaining wall and things like that? Or was it, plant debris, limbs and things like that? Or was it, fiberglass insulation and wallboard and everything from the house? So depending on what was stacked there, you want to make sure it's gone and that none of that's going to be there. And then the next thing is, well, what type of turf grass do you have? Because if you had a Bermuda lawn, as soon as you removed everything, it'd start growing again. Things like the centipede, if it's been sitting there for what, Hurricane Sally was 8 months ago?
Yeah, it was late September.
You could have killed all the lawn in there, and you basically kind of just starting over. And I think it was Larry who said when you're looking at starting new, you need fresh. So take that opportunity, get out all the dead material that's in there, depending on if it's a rhizome producing, scratch it up, get all the debris out. Dr. Unruh said, put some organic matter back in, level it out, and either sod it or seed it. If we remove the debris, we want it to recover as fast as possible. And a lot of times here, the seed is a hard thing. And if we do all that nice fluffy stuff to it and the grass isn't growing real fast, then it's just an opportunity for the weeds to come in. So my recommendation is, if possible, just to come in, get it cleaned up, get it prepped again. And then if finances are okay, put some sod down.
Yeah, there you go.
Let me interject in there, Daniel, because if you go down to any of the box stores, retail stores, and look at these little seed patch products that are there.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Run the other way. Set it back up on the shelf as far back as you can, so that hopefully nobody sees it. Most of those, so if you turn the bag around and you look at the label that's required to be on there by law, you're going to see that many of those are going to be ryegrass.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a grass that we said we overseed with in the winter months. And as soon as it gets hot, here in another 2 or 3 weeks, it's dead as a hammer. I mean, it's going to die. It's an annual.
Yeah.
So it'll germinate quick, look pretty for a few weeks, but it's going to die. The other side are some of the warm season patches are Bermuda grass. And they're common Bermuda grass. And so you just planted the world's worst weed into your lawn. Now that may be okay with you. If you want this nice, pristine looking lawn, it will not blend well with those patch products will not blend well. So I'm not a big advocate of those.
Okay, cool. Good deal. So while we've got you here, Doc, St. Augustine's the king in Florida still, but Zoysia's been eating its lunch in the Panhandle, especially the last few years. And it's a different animal. And so could you just quickly, some of the general care of Zoysia, maybe how it's different than other grasses we might be used to?
So Zoysia grass, it's been around forever, but it really has made its big impact in Florida. It really started in and around the villages of Central Florida. That's really where it made the impact, and then it just mushroomed. About 10 years into Zoysia grass becoming pretty mainstream, especially downstate, we saw entire subdivisions imploding because of Zoysia grass mismanagement. So a team of us, and we've done one here in the Panhandle, traveled around and did these full-day education workshops. And so I'll take that 7 hours of education and I'll boil it down to a few bullet points. Most people are way over fertilizing it, okay? So Zoysia grass takes about half of the fertilizer that St. Augustine grass does, and maybe about 2 times as much as Centipede grass, okay? So cut the fertilizer back.
So we're looking at like what, 2 pounds of
2 pounds a year. And again, if you have older landscapes with a lot of organic matter in the soil, those numbers can come down. If it's really sandy and you don't have a nutrient holding capacity in those soils, then that number may need to hedge a little bit. So that's number one, it's over fertilized. Number two, most people are mowing it entirely too tall. That mower should be 2 inches or lower on those Zoysia grasses. Now the problem is if you have a commercial contractor maintaining your property and they swoop in a 5-foot deck mower that's going Mach 2, and that deck is out there swaying back and forth and scalping and causing real problems. So 2 inches or less, the shorter you can mow it, without causing other, scalping injuries and stuff is best. When Zoysia is good, it is really good. But then when it is bad, it's really bad. The other thing is number 3 is irrigation. Zoysia grasses are extremely drought tolerant grasses. They're marketed as such, but the way it handles drought is very different than the other grasses. They will go brown and go into that level of dormancy very, very quickly. Most people's idea of drought tolerance is that it'll stay green without any water, and that's not what Zoysias do. They will go brown. Non-uniformity, and so Mark spoke about putting the little cat food cans or tuna fish cans out there and looking at how long does it take to get a half an inch of water. If there's much more than about 10% variability in those catch cans that you put out there, so if this one's got 1 inch and this one's got 1/4 inch and that one's got 3/4 and this one's got 3/8 of an inch, your irrigation uniformity is way off, and Zoysia grass will tattle on you in a hurry. And you will see this mismatch of non-uniform irrigation. So half the fertilizer, mow it at 2 inches or less, uniform irrigation. Those are the biggies.
And so we do get a lot of questions about thatch with Zoysia grass. Is that a concern?
Thatch is a big concern. And we've seen that, in fact, when we were doing these workshops all over the state, we were dragging equipment around that most landscapers had never seen in their life. Things called, a verticutter and an aerifier. You have to, especially if it's being mismanaged or overmanaged. Zoysia grasses produce both above ground stems, those are stolons, and below ground stems, those are rhizomes. And then what's interesting, if you've ever mowed Zoysia, it's kind of tough to mow. That Zoysia grass leaf tissue and stem tissue contains a lot of silica and a lot of a lot of lignin, and that doesn't they don't decay very quickly. And so when the clippings hit the ground, or those stems tend to build up over time, they don't decay very quickly. And so it does necessitate the need to come through there and run a vertical mower or a power rake across there. And the frequency that you do that is really kind of dictated by how well it's being managed.
Yep. Good deal. And Larry, to wind up this section, and then we'll finish up on pests and diseases. Another common question: when you're cutting your grass, should you mulch those clippings or bag them and tote them off somewhere?
Yes, if you're if a person is mowing correctly, that is, they're mowing on a regular basis, they're mowing on such a regular basis that they're not stressing the grass. They're not taking off more than about 1/4 of the blade height. Now, you don't want to let the grass get this tall and mow it down here, and let it get this tall and mow it down here. That's too stressful. So mowing on a regular basis with a sharp blade, keeping your mowing blade sharp. And that's the key really for most of the lawn grasses. You don't necessarily have to remove the clippings, but when you look at the clippings, the grass blades, green grass blades are heavy in water. I mean, they're probably 80–90% water. And during the course of a mowing season, if you let the clippings fall to the ground and decompose in an average lawn, you're recycling the equivalent of one application of fertilizer. So there are benefits to just letting the clippings fall. If you're dealing with a noxious weed problem in a part of the yard, or a active disease problem, you might want to temporarily bag those clippings and get them out of the yard so you're not spreading the weed seeds or disease organism that, throughout the yard. But regular mowing done correctly, leave the clips there and don't worry about bagging them up in plastic bags, putting curbside for the county or city to do something with. Recycle those.
Good answer. I like that. So now the much anticipated section on pest management. We've got 7 minutes left here today, so we're probably going to go over 5 to 10 minutes. So those of you who are with us and want your weed and your pest questions answered, please hang with us here, and we'll get to that as soon as we can. But let's get started. Let's dive right into pest management. Mark Tancig, this is a great question. How does herbicides used to kill weeds, or how do herbicides used to kill weeds affect the growth and health of the desired plants, in this case, the turfgrass? Should we be worried about that?
So for turfgrass, I mean, for either desirable plants or turfgrass, yes, you should be worried about it. And the thing is you want to make sure you're using the product correctly. So most of the herbicides that we're going to use for weed control in lawns are selective for broadleaf plants, right? They're going to attack broadleaves and they're going to leave grassy plants alone. So if you're using that product near desirable broadleaf plants, yes, you need to be careful because it will attack them. Now, even if you're using these selective products and the label says that you can use it on St. Augustine, Centipede grass, whatever it is, you do need to remember that if the lawn is stressed in any way, is it newly flushing out in the springtime? Is it stressed from drought? Is it got other issues going on? Is it too hot maybe? So this is all kind of information that you will find on those herbicide labels. Even if it's selective and it's supposed to be used on the lawn, it can still damage your lawn if it's in that stress. So you just want to make sure you read those labels carefully and follow those directions. But yeah, anytime you're using an herbicide, those things are designed to kill plants. So you want to be cautious of, how you're using it and be careful. Labels the law.
Yeah, so that's a really great segue into all of the rest of what we're going to talk about the rest of the time here. So good deal. Larry, we talked about that weed and feed earlier, so I thought it'd be only natural that we come back to you here. We touched on this a little earlier, so maybe just give us a refresher. When is the best time to put out a pre-emergence treatment to control and prevent weeds in your lawn? And is there one in particular that you might recommend just as for a general purpose?
Okay, I want to remind everybody that in the chat box, a lot of links are being placed there, some that you can pull up online, some that are not as readily available. And I've written 2 fact sheets on this topic, one called Summer Annual Lawn Weed Control Timeline, and one is called Winter Annual Weed Control Timeline. Two basic different times. Timing is everything. The timing on the summer weeds would be basically the month of February. And to fine tune that weather-wise, let's say you're in the month of February, when day temperatures reach 65 to 70 degrees for 4 to 5 consecutive days in a row, that is the narrow window to get the pre-emergent out. For the winter weeds, the timing is different. You're trying to put the product out just before the weeds. The name pre-emergent is descriptive. The seeds germinate and then they attempt to emerge. They push up through that chemical layer pre-emergent, and that's when they're killed. So you got a narrow window on the winter weeds. That would be the month of October, basically. And to fine tune that temperature wise, you're in the month of October when the nighttime temperatures drop 55 to 60 degrees for several consecutive nights. That's the very narrow window to get that pre-emergent out.
Awesome. Simple answer, you know, keep up with the weather, right? All right. So another one, Larry, this is everybody has this weed, whether they know what it's called or not, and they all hate it. It's called chamber bitter. And so if you have chamber bitter in your lawn, what can you do about it?
I tell most people, if you don't have it, wait just a little bit and you'll have it.
Yeah, for sure.
Chamber bitter is that little weed that looks like a miniature mimosa. It doesn't grow up into a tree. It's not woody. It's herbaceous, and it is problematic. It's not native. It's very prolific, but it needs very warm soil conditions to germinate. So a great timing on this. Forget what I said earlier on timing on this weed. This weed has to have warmer soil conditions to begin to germinate and come up. So basically, you need to delay putting a pre-emergent out until about April, about where we are now. And one of the best pre-emergent products for this weed is one that contains isoxaben. That's ISOXABEN. There's a number of brand names. There's a link that maybe shared in the chat box. But one of the best publications, usually push UFIFAS extension materials, but Clemson Cooperative Extension, which is a land-grant university, has one of the best publications I've seen on chamber bitter. And you can pull that up just searching Clemson Extension chamber bitter. But what I like about it, it includes a chart, quite a lengthy chart. I don't know if I can put this up where you can see it, just to give you a taste. Anyway, it's not showing up that well, but it gives you a lengthy chart of the products for the homeowner to look for. Atrazine, if you're dealing with Centipede, St. Augustine, if you get the little seedlings early enough when the temperature's cool, before the chamber bitter goes to seed, that's another option. Always try to control weeds before they go to seed.
Very, very good. Thank you.
There's an interesting new product, a relatively new product in the market that has that isoxaben, but it has been coupled with prodiamine, which is another pre-emergence product, but it's called Gemini.
Okay.
And so, I think it's important to enter many of the over-the-counter products that you can buy in the retail, box stores are pretty darn ineffective.
Yep.
I mean, just being candid. And so, but they're priced right.
Gallery is the old school one that we used, right?
Gallery was the old one. And so, if you're confident in your ability, you can go visit, professional lawn care distributors, and you can buy the products that the professionals do. But you have to realize that you're going to pay, $375 for that bottle, not $37 like down at the box store.
But it works.
But it works, and it's enough for you and your entire family and their families for 37 years.
Yeah.
But many of those the effective products, are typically not the ones that you're going to find in the retail sector, over the counter kind of.
That's
I'm
a
just
great point. Great point. So again, we're at 1 o'clock, but we've got a couple more questions that we're going to finish up here. If you need to leave and head out, thank you for being here with us. And for those of you that can stay, we're going to knock these out as quickly as we can. Dr. Unruh, you mentioned earlier that there's not a lot of effective post-emergent control in St. Augustine. So in your mind, is pre-emergent weed control the most effective way to keep the weeds back in that grass?
Again, it's hard what weeds are we going after. We're focused on our, on our warm season grasses. So and the grassy weeds, there are no labeled post-emergence herbicides. That's after the weed is already there in St. Augustine grass. And so you have to do it via pre-emergence. Now we have one little advantage up here in the Panhandle in the fact that we still get a little bit cool in the winters, and sometimes we get killing frosts, which can, ding some of those back. But
yeah,
if you were down Orlando South, the annual weeds failed to read the Florida Lawn Handbook, and they don't realize that they're actually annuals, and they tend to live longer than they're supposed to. So we still at least get a little bit of some colder winters, and we'll kill some of those back. But yeah, you have to do it pre-emergence.
Yep, very good. And Mark, kind of along those lines, if you don't have a grassy weed and we're dealing with a broadleaf like dollarweed, some of those tough broadleaves, what can we do in St. Augustine?
So what I would do, what I would think of first, if I went to someone's yard or someone called me with a bad dollarweed problem, the first thing I would ask them is, how are they irrigating, right? So when we think about weed control, you always want to think, the best method of weed control is a really healthy lawn, right? So if your lawn is just gangbusters, weeds shouldn't be as problematic. And so again, if I had someone calling about dollarweed really bad in their lawn, and I'm going to try to be quick here, so I won't tell the story of the woman who didn't know where her timer was, and she basically had a lawn of dollarweed because it was watering too much, right? So dollarweed loves too much water. So check out your water. Now, if it's still problematic, that is something, and I think we have a link that's showing up. I believe Dr. Unruh wrote this about control of dollarweed and various turfgrass species. And I believe in general, atrazine is something that is kind of used across the board on the various species to help with dollarweed.
Thank you, Mark. Dr. Unruh, so for folks that have, the traditional Panhandle low maintenance lawn of that mix of Centipede and Bahia grass, and they may not want to use a liquid spray, is there a good granular herbicide that they might be able to apply with a fertilizer spreader?
Effective?
Yeah. So the pre-emergence, obviously,
Yeah, I mean the pre-emergence, and so those are going to have products that contain, like, when you look at the ingredients, pendimethalin, prodiamine, dithiopyr, and so those are those pre-emergents. Again, on the broadleaf side, I'm not a big ad. Many of the broadleaf weeds really need to be treated with liquid products. Okay. Because, and then again, you got a granular product out there. They typically are formulated with some kind of fertilizer. So you've got that patch of, weeds over there, but it's not the rest of the yard. So you are, from an environmental standpoint, does it make any sense to go treat the entire lawn when the patch of weeds is only, over here? And then many of our broadleaf weeds, we're just blessed to have these really, really difficult to control weeds. Virginia buttonweed, dollarweed, doveweed is the new monster. Chamber bitter, those kinds of things are very difficult to control because of waxy leaf surfaces or pubescence hairs that are on the leaves. And those granulars hit the leaf of the dollarweed and just bounce off like a trampoline. And so you're dependent upon root uptake, trying to get the herbicide into the plant and translocate it. And they're just not that effective. So they really need to be, treated through foliar, a liquid product.
Okay. And staying in that Bahia and Centipede yard, we've got a gentleman here that used Image to help control that Bahia inside of a Centipede yard. So what else would you recommend to keep the Bahia out of the Centipede if you have some encroachment? What are some techniques?
So it's interesting he brings up Image, okay? Because what has happened, we've seen marketing out there, and you really got to read the products, because Image was a name that everybody understood, just like Roundup, okay? Well, there are Roundup products now in the marketplace that contain absolutely no glyphosate. That's the active ingredient. Okay. And so Image was an old herbicide, a mazaquin, I believe, that was very effective on some nut sedge species. The new Image, in fact, you'll see some bottles and you set them side by side and they almost look identical, except it'll say Image and then the next one says Image for St. Augustine grass. And it doesn't have any of the imazaquin in it. And so just because it says Image or Roundup Ready or Roundup doesn't mean it has glyphosate in it or imazaquin. So when you say Image, I really don't know what product it is.
Yep.
If we're going to take Bahia grass, clumpy Bahia grass out of any other grass, we want to use a herbicide called metsulfuron. And it's marketed under a number of different labels now. But the best approach is the straight up metsulfuron methyl, 3 applications every 21 days. And it's very, very slow herbicide to act.
Sure.
And so it'll weaken it. And then you treat that patch again 21 days later, it weakens it even more. And then about another 21 days, you spray it again. And next thing you know, that Bahia grass is just melted out of that lawn. I've encouraged lawn care companies to do nothing but, market, Bahia grass patch control.
Yeah.
Because it's everything looks good. And you got the patch of Bahia grass. So
It's a big problem. All right, good deal. Mark Tancig, which post-emergent herbicides are safe and effective for reducing oxalis in a centipede lawn? Several people ask this. Oxalis is one of those toughies. What you think?
Again, I'm going to rely on some documentation here from Dr. Unruh. So
Okay.
I think there'll be an oxalis biology and management document coming up. But for your centipede grass, I believe we're looking at things like 2,4-Ds, kind of some general broadleaf herbicides. Now, the thing with oxalis, first of all, this is an edible plant. You can eat it. So before you think of it as a weed, remember you can go munch on it, and it's got a nice little flavor to it. But it is a perennial. And I know the document's got some pre-emergent herbicides listed. Those will block new patches of oxalis from coming up, but those perennial clumps are going to keep coming back and back. So it's pretty much general kind of broadleaf chemicals that are recommended for herbicide control for that oxalis.
Yeah.
But I'd say give it a try before you spray it, right? But give it a little shot, try a little bit. It's pretty good.
I know Dr. Unruh was mentioning some professional care products, and for those tougher broadleaf weeds, I've had really good success with a product called Celsius. Would that be a control option, Dr.
I
Unruh?
think that's dicamba, right? Yeah.
It's dicamba and a couple of other things. Yeah.
Celsius is a 3-way product that's very effective. And you're going to pay for that level of effectiveness. There's another product that we've been using. It's it's some older chemistry that's been packaged together, and it's called coastal herbicide.
Coastal.
It is safe for Bermuda, Centipede, St. Augustine, and Zoysia. But it has three kind of older herbicides in there. Mazaquin, that's that old Image product I mentioned a second ago.
Yeah.
Prodiamine, which is a pre-emergence product, and Simazine, which has some both pre and post activity. Now, because the Simazine is in there, there will be some label restrictions on how close you can get to lakes and whatnot, and water. But we have used it in kind of winter, and I've tested it here and down in South Florida. It's quite effective with a lot of those crazy winter weeds that we get at taking them out. And very safe on the turf as well. So coastal herbicide.
Okay, cool.
Great. This is why we love having Dr. Unruh with us.
Yeah, reusing some of those older herbicides. So along those lines, again, we mentioned Zoysia grass is becoming ever more popular. What would be a good general weed control program for Zoysia, Doc?
Keep it thick, mow it properly,
Yeah.
fertilize it properly, irrigate it properly. Zoysia is an amazing grass. I mean, when Zoysia grass really is thick and doing what it's supposed to do, it chokes a lot of weeds out. Now, that's not to say, we're in Florida, we get a lot of weeds. I would, direct you back to there was a Zoysia grass publication put in the chat, which is candidly the author really needs to update it. Maybe I'll let the author know.
Yeah, you should do that.
I should do that. But the Zoysia grass has so many herbicides on the list.
Yeah.
It's very, very tolerant of just about every herbicide. So again, look at those publications, and we have a whole series of weed fact sheets that if you're growing this grass, this weed, this grass, here's what you do. So
All right. So the last specific weed we're going to here is I'm gonna throw this to Pat. Hey Pat, if you could for us, what would you do with Dichondra in the yard? They don't specify turfgrass. They don't specify their management. They just say we've got Dichondra. What can we do about it?
Well, I grew up in Southern California where Dichondra was a turfgrass alternative.
Yep.
And people had it. Don't have to mow it. It grows very short. I'm not I'm not anti-chemical, but I'm not, I know there's uses for it. I don't
Right.
really have an answer for that one. So if one of the analysts would know something to control that, please join in, rescue me.
any of those products we've mentioned,
Yeah.
but again, unless you're just hung up on wanting, this pristine look, let it go.
A little Dichondra never hurt anybody, right?
Yeah, most of the time you're not going to see it under the grass. So
Yeah.
And
If
you
you got a
can put it
good
on
thing.
You can put it on your salad as well as your Oxalis. Right?
we know
edible
Mark-
one. Good job.
Mark has garnished his food with that Oxalis. So Mark, while we're talking about non-chemical weed killer, so what are some, this person asked a difficult question. They say, what's the best non-poison weed killer? So let's say non-synthetic chemical weed killer. What do we have some options there if this is the route you choose to go?
Yeah, so remember that, I think the question was a non-poison weed killer, right? And that, those words don't really go together well because you're trying to find something that kills weed. So by its nature, it's some type of poison, right? So, the other way to think about this, and, if we back up a little bit, get a little bit on this, pest management, we want to focus on prevention. Right. So what are all those cultural practices in the lawn, the watering, the fertilizing, the mowing, especially to keep the lawn healthy, to fend off the weeds? We want to focus mostly on that. That's the best way to avoid having to use weed killers in the first place, is making sure your turf is healthy. The second one is like physical or mechanical removal. Right. So there's, get down on your hands and knees and pull weeds. Right. No poisons needed. You get exercise and you're getting those weeds out of the lawn. Mowing is another way, and Larry brought up a very good point of, if you have a weed problem, there's a patch in the grass of weeds, you can use your bagger and kind of go over that with your mower and, take those weed seeds away from your lawn so that they don't come back the following year. Beyond that, you will hear people talk about things like vinegar. You might hear corn gluten. There's various kinds of these kind of natural plant products or oils, like there's a product called Burnout that people have been using that's available here in Tallahassee. That's like a clove. It actually smells really good. It's like citrus and cloves and garlic. It's got a really nice little smell to it. But all these products are also poisons, right? So, and you have to follow the same kind of precautions as using an herbicide, where you're following the label and you're protecting yourself. So industrial strength vinegar, which is what's recommended for the weed control, can blind you, right? So you want to be careful when you're using these, non-synthetic natural products, because they can still be harmful to you. They can still be harmful to the environment. And remember that the Romans salted the earth. I've heard of folks using salt and vinegar together as some sort of weed control product, but that's a good way to make sure that nothing ever grows back in that spot again. So you want to be careful with, using these products, and they are also mostly like the Burnout product. They're contact herbicides. So you're going to spray them. It's going to knock back the parts that they come into contact with,
Including the turfgrass.
Right. And including your grass, right? They're not selective products usually. And so those weeds are just going to keep coming back. You're not going to get the root of the problem. So,
right.
I would say if you want to try to avoid using pesticides or herbicides, You take really good care of your grass. You hand pull some of the problematic ones, and then maybe you just change your expectations and your kind of like your aesthetic threshold for those weeds. And remember that when someone's driving by at 30 miles an hour, if it looks green, you're doing a good job.
There you go.
At one point in time, I literally wrote a dissertation on corn gluten meal. And literally.
And was it effective?
That was my PhD word. So here's the deal. Corn gluten meal is a weed and feed product. Okay, not marketed so much as that, but it is a 10% nitrogen product. And so to put the product on the ground at a rate that is sufficient to control crabgrass puts 2 pounds of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet on the ground, which is about 5 times more nitrogen than you need on centipede grass on the lower end. That's the complete amount of nitrogen you need for your Zoysia grass and St. Augustine grass. And it's not that effective in the deep south for controlling crabgrass. So just take the corn gluten meal, batter your fish with it, and fry your fish, as opposed to putting it out in the lawn.
There you go.
Maybe put some Oxalis or Dichondra on top of it.
So
I'll reiterate what you said, Mark, about these alternative products. Some of the most toxic products known to man are natural. And so there's a lot of these green Gobler products that are available on, Amazon and things. And these are 30 and 40% acetic acid. So when you're spraying your weeds, if you've got a wart or two on your hand, just go ahead and spray it too. I mean, they're caustic.
Yeah, they
so
are.
be very, very careful with those products.
Yeah. Doc, our last question that we had submitted before today is, how would you treat a lawn fungus? So specifically, they're talking about take-all fungus, and maybe just quickly touching on the difference between take-all and large patch.
Two very different critters. So take-all is ubiquitous in the soil. You can go to a perfectly healthy lawn, take a soil sample, take a plant sample, send it to the lab, and it'll come back and they will identify Gammatonomyces. That's the causal organism, whether or not the lawn has a dead patch or not. And it's one of those other light, water, temperature, nutrition. It's something's getting kind of out of kilter that then allows that fungi that's in the soil to then proliferate to a point where we're taking out plants. There are some marginally effective fungicides for take-all. But if it recurs, it's because it's soil borne, it's going to stay there, it's going to recur year after year after year.
Yeah.
And so that's that. Large patch is a different ball game. In large patch, we call it large patch. It is Rhizoctonia solani. For those of you that are from up north, you would refer to it as brown patch. But the reality is, it is a different strain of the organism. Just like we're dealing with COVID right now. There's these new strains that are popping up. So we don't want to call it brown patch in the south. It is large patch. It's a different version, different form of Rhizoc. Here's the bottom line. Rhizoc, it's deadly on Zoysia, and it's really deadly on all grasses, but the remnants of the disease on Zoysia grass sticks with us for a long time. So you see that ugly patch all winter long and into the spring. St. Augustine, it's not quite as dramatic, but it'll still get it. So here's the deal. Twice a year when the soil temperatures, so this time of year, as our soil temperatures kind of cross over and hit that 65 to 75 degree temperature in the spring, and in the fall when the temperatures are cooling down and they pass over that 75 degree mark, soil temperatures, and from 75 down to 65, that is when that organism is active in our soils. And it's not necessarily when you're going to see those dead rings, but that's when the disease is active, and then the ring expression will come after that. And so it's exacerbated. Both of those diseases are exacerbated by water. So, and you think about especially the spring side of that equation, we're getting a lot of rain in those spring months when our soil temperatures are between that 65 and 75 degree. If we over irrigate in the fall, typically those temperatures in the fall kind of correlate with one of our drier times of the year. And so if I go in and see a large patch issue in this fall, it generally is pointing to the fact that the lawn's being over irrigated, or at least the spot that's getting the disease is being over irrigated because they didn't follow Mark's instructions on how to calibrate their sprinkler system.
Gotcha. Well, that pretty much does it for today. Y'all, let's go through each of you for some closing thoughts. I appreciate everybody from being on today. Larry, what do you want to leave us with today?
Well, I did notice a post by a Pete Vergot in the chat that says, ask Larry to talk about growing Easter grass. And I'll quickly say that Easter grass, if you want to see a video on growing it and harvesting it, go to the Okaloosa Extension Facebook video and Facebook video post, probably the newest one, or the Okaloosa 4-H Facebook, and look for the video on Easter grass. Saying that tongue in cheek, I'm gonna have to wrap up by saying I have a master gardener, and the first person I heard coin this, uses this term, was surface vegetation. And she has a lawn that is older, still some of the original grass there, maybe a mix of some other grasses that have come in, and along with some weeds. And she mows it, it's green, she's happy with it. She calls it surface vegetation. So sometimes lowering our expectations for Florida lawn, and remember that the weeds move in where the lawn thins.
There you go.
So being able to diagnose and answer the question, why is this lawn unhappy? Why is it thinning? Why is it not doing as well as it used to do? Answering that one question and getting to the bottom of it, maybe multiple issues. Why is this lawn not growing correctly? I think is the key to solving the problem.
The key. Dr. Pat, what you got for us? Good to see you today.
Thanks. I would just say, we go back to our Florida-friendly principles and right plant, right place. In the 60s, we played on the lawn all the time. We didn't break our bones because we had turf grass underneath. And nowadays, it's mostly a decoration. And with all of the chemical input from fertilizers to pesticides that everybody's heard about today, do we need that? Other than just, as Mark said, driving by at 30 miles an hour and looking pretty. So think about converting some of those out, or those turf grass areas, to maybe something more ornamental. And then slow and steady. Don't push your grass, your turf grass. Don't put, Dr. Unruh was, or I think it was Larry was talking about some of the weed and feeds having 29% nitrogen in it. Don't ever do that to your lawns. It's going to have a chaotic effect on the long run.
All right, Mark, what you got for us quick?
There's a lot of things to be worried about and to be, to stress about in your life. So don't let your lawn grass be one of them. It's just the grass outside. So remember that, mow it properly, water it properly if you do, and fertilize it well, and the lawn will be just fine.
And Doc, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
No problem. I guess the final comment, is we come back, somebody made the comment about, expectations. And to some people, they have to have, they can't have any plant out of place. They can't, they don't want a weed or anything like that. And, and that's, maybe you should address that at some point. But the fact is, if you've got this, functional, and we'll define function as in a lot of different ways. But if it's meeting your objectives, then let it go. If it's not meeting your objectives, then do a change up. It's interesting. I lived in an HOA for a while, and ironically, I got a letter because I had too many weeds in my lawn. And it's one of those things. I probably had the prettiest lawn in the neighborhood. Everybody's like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Just about nothing."
Yep. There you go.
On an annual basis, I used to irrigate my lawn maybe 10 times. The sprinkler system was there, but it was always shut off. And I determined when it needed a drink, not the controller. Rarely did any pest control. Rarely. I had zoysia in my backyard, and I didn't want my worms to get too out of whack on me. But I think we tend to overdo it. And then we're kind of this feast or famine. We get the spring bug, which is upon us right now. We got to run down to the store and load up the carts. And
oh yeah.
and that's not a good approach either. So let's just simplify some things and not be so uptight about them having to have it perfect.
Awesome. Those are all great thoughts. I appreciate everybody for joining us today. If you would, Julie posted our survey in the chat. Please take that for us. Doesn't take but just a minute. And this is a reminder, our session, in May is coming up, May the 13th on herbs. And then following that, June the 10th on ornamental and turf diseases. Dr. Unruh, we got our old friend, Dr. Phil Harmon from Gainesville joining us from that. So that should be cool. So we hope to see y'all in those next couple. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you got some great information, and we'll see you next time on Gardening in the Panhandle Live. Y'all have a good afternoon.